Bluegrass Airport is an American aviation story. Its remarkable history has been chronicled through a series of oral history interviews. We're speaking with Jim Graybill, a pilot and flight trainer with Eastern Airlines for nearly 30 years, who first soloed at Bluegrass Field in 1949. Jim is an active volunteer at the Aviation Museum of Kentucky and was inducted into the Kentucky Aviation Museum Hall of Fame in 2010. Jim, would you talk about your early association with airplanes and flying?
Why I wanted to fly, I'll never know. My sister tells me that I used to put sticks together when I was early age and run around the yard in the country pretending it was an airplane. Why I have the bug for flying, I'll never know. None of my family, hardly knows even think anything about an airplane.
Did you have an aviation mentor or idol?
No, not really. Not until I started taking flying lessons. And my parents couldn't understand why I wanted to do that, but no, not really. As time went on, yeah, I had a couple of people I looked up to a great deal. Dick Malloy down in Bowman Field was one of the big mentors, and he's the one that really kept me going by instructing down there.
Tell us about your first solo flight in 1949 at Bluegrass Field.
Well, the airport was pretty much the same, with the exception of the runway that they tore up, the one that comes in over, it used to come in over Keeneland. But the runways are pretty much the same. Of course, the terminal building, the old terminal building, and where Bowman Flying Service was, that's all gone now. So, but that's kind of where we're sitting right now, or was. You look forward to the day you're going to solo, and an instructor gets out of the back seat and says, "Go at it." I mean, your heart rate goes up, probably quadruple. But it was probably one of the most memorable times in my life when I pulled that airplane off the ground the first time. It kind of fulfilled a dream that I had, and not knowing how far I would go in aviation, that was a big, big step. I have that completely circled several times in my logbook.
What kind of airplane did you solo in?
Bowman Flying Service had a Cessna 140 that I flew.
Do you have any favorite stories or memorable moments regarding old Bluegrass Field?
Oh, not really, I guess. They may be, to you all, but it seemed like every time I came out here, excuse me, to go flying, was all a memorable time. I really, all my life, and still do, live for the day I can get off the ground and go up. That first solo flight, I guess I came back and I was probably up in Cloud 9 for about 2 days, and it was just great. Flying's great.
Talk about some of the people who made an impression on you in those early days.
Charlie Hamner soloed me. I guess he was probably one of the mentors in those early days. After I got a few hours right toward my private, I went down to Bowman Field, and Dick Malloy gave me my check ride for my private and my commercial. Of course, from then on up, every license you got, it was always with the FAA.
Talk about the differences between Bluegrass Field and Bowman Field.
As far as flying goes, Bowman Field was very, very congested. I guess Dick probably had, I'm guessing at this, probably close to 20 or 25 airplanes that on Saturdays and Sundays out there, regardless of what runway we were using, it was 3. One on the left side, one on the runway, and one on the right side around the pattern all day long. So, here at Bowman Flying Service, they only had a couple of 140s that they were using but the training wasn't near as congested as it was at Bowman Field.
Can congestion be nerve-wracking for a flight instructor?
No, not really. I mean, your head is on a swivel looking around, and the control tower at Bowman Field was very, very helpful in keeping all three in, But usually if you took off on the left side in the grass, that's where you stayed, on the left side in the grass or your hole, where you're shooting takeoffs and landings with a student.
What kind of services did they offer at Bowmer Flying Services?
I guess Chuck Bowmer probably, I'm guessing at this, Chuck, to go back a little bit, Chuck, prior to me coming over here, he was in an accident flying power line control. Chuck had a couple of airplanes that we used for, students. But other than the size, no, it wasn't that much different, really.
Jim, was Bowmer a private aviation service or just flight instruction?
It was Bowmer, called Bowmer Flying Service, and you could, he took a lot of the charter trips with Chuck, and a lot of instructing. When I came back with my instructor's ticket, I'd already been married, and I had a job as a plant engineer over at Square D, and I had a shift all night long at Square D, and about 11 o'clock in the morning, I was out here doing instructing with about 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. Of course, that's a lot younger too.
Tell us more about the evolution of Bluegrass Airport from Bluegrass Field.
I wasn't really around when they started evolving it into what it is now. When I was flying with Eastern, we had a trip out of Washington to Louisville, and with a stop here. And I guess the last trip I flew with the airlines in here was probably late 1970s, early 1980s. It was a 727. And it really hadn't changed much at that particular time. Runways are the same, tower and terminal was the same. I'm not sure what year they started tearing the old terminal down, but it was quite small compared to what they have now. Control tower was on top of the terminal building, and when I was with a student here, we could take students up in the tower, let them to see what was going on from the tower's perspective. Of course, you can't do that now.
Talk about experiences or memories when you were flying here and recall being noteworthy. Any characters?
When I came back and was instructing at Bluegrass Field, that would have been late 1960s and early 61. It hadn't changed much at that time from when I first came out. Parking areas, terminal, everything was still pretty much the same. Chuck Bowmer, he only had a couple, or maybe 3 airplanes that we had. I was in the CAP for a while too, and they had an airplane that we used, but of course not for students. But I flew that quite a bit. Mainly I was just trying to build time to get with the airlines. When I was instructing at Bowman Field, after I graduated from engineering at UK, I got a job with Mingo Box Company as a plant engineer down there. And I was living in Shelbyville, was where I grew up. And I'd go to work at Mingle at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd get off at around 5. I'd go straight to Bowman Field and instruct at night until about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then start all over the next day doing the same thing. So, I remember my dad, I was sitting on the house we built here in Lexington, and I had my son, I guess he was probably a year and a half old at that time. And I was playing with him out front in the yard, and Dad drove up, and one of the things that Dad said, when do you go to work? And I told him, and he said, what are you doing now? I said, well, I just got in from instructing. He said, when are you going to give that flying bug up? Until I got with Eastern, Dad, none of my family really cared much about aviation, but they kind of changed their tune when I got that job with Eastern.
You went to University of Kentucky for engineering. Did you know you wanted to be a pilot?
Oh, I knew I wanted to be an airline pilot from day one. if you saw that that story, or "This Is Your Life," really, that pretty much says it was just one wonderful job. But I would have paid them to do that. Of course, I didn't tell them that, but for the 30 years I had with Eastern.
Where did you get your commercial pilot's license?
At Bowman Field. Dick Malloy gave it to me. I got my instrument rating down there, my instructor's rating at Bowman Field, because the FAA at that time was in the old terminal building at Bowman Field, and they had to go give you those 2 ratings. My instrument rating was, I took off from Bowman Field and wound up shooting an approach here at runway 4 in Bluegrass Field. Between here and Louisville, it was kind of kept it hot in the airways.
Would you talk about your career with Eastern Airlines?
Yeah, I was hired with Eastern in October 9th, 1961. And I was based in Washington after I got out of flight training. We moved from Lexington to Washington, I guess in early part of 1962. And from that time on, I was really out of Kentucky. I was based in Washington for about 5 years, and then to Atlanta, and then in 1979, I went into the flight training department with Eastern, and we were living in Atlanta at that time, and that's until I retired. That's about where we. Well, as you probably know, Eastern went under in 1989, or early part of 1990. I retired in almost 29 years to the day in October of '89, and I went to Europe and flew for Air Holland for about 6 months, and being away from the family and everything that long, that was enough, and I came back, and then I got a job with Gulfstream in flight safety in Savannah, and that's where I lived until I retired in 2006.
When you moved back to Lexington, you became involved in the Aviation Museum of Kentucky.
That's one of the wonderful places for a worn-out pilots to be. The people that come in out there in the museum are interested somewhat in aviation. Of course, the museum is dedicated to children, because we have that training program during the summer. And you have these young children come in and they see the airplanes in the hangar, and their eyes just go wide open, and it's a wonderful place to be and pass some of your knowledge onto them. And it's this move that we just got to the larger facilities is just great. Until then, we had 3 or 4 T hangars that were just stuffed full of airplanes, airplane parts, and so forth that now we can show over here.
Talk about volunteering at the Aviation Museum of Kentucky.
Oh, we need everybody we can get. If they have any experience in aviation at all, we're terribly short of docents over there. We had to change the hours of the museum because we didn't have enough docents to go around with the 2 hangars we've got. Anything that on Tuesday nights is a big work night, you can come in and there's something for you to do, supervised, of course. But anything that has to do with aviation, as far as the docents, well, we're trying to get some women to come in and just be greeters in the terminal building, and then the docents take over and go from there. But we're just so short on everything on volunteers over there. Well, the Tuesday night crew usually does most of the maintaining, and they do a terrific job over there. I don't know. I've only been on Tuesday nights a couple of times, and it's like a beehive in there. The rest of the time, it's we're taking people through and guided tours, and But the children that come through are the most exciting thing for me to do, because they're just like a sponge. You know, they ask questions, and some of the questions they ask kind of blow your mind. You know, how sharp they really are. Not sharp, I shouldn't say, but how knowledgeable they already are of some aviation.
Are there memories you recall from flying into Bluegrass Airport?
Over Keeneland, I should have brought this out here, because I dug them out and I found a couple of them. The old runway that was kind of north-south, not exactly north-south, but close enough. You came right over the top of the middle of the racetrack at Keeneland. And looking straight down at about 300 or 400 feet off the ground, the hedge out there was cut, and you read Keeneland.
Talk about the scenic aspect of flying into Bluegrass Airport.
And in the early days, back in the early 50s and all through the mid 50s when I was still here, I don't know, there wasn't too much sightseeing going on. I had students, and you know, I was more focused on them than I was. There were a couple of buildings downtown that we used for aiming points, so to speak. And of course the Keeneland racetrack. You could see the Keeneland racetrack in the air a long way off before you could, you know, pick out the airport, because of the racetrack and some of the buildings. But I took my, I guess this was 5, 6 years ago now. I took my niece and her husband up, and a twin Baron that I had, and the sightseeing then, and that's all we did, was pretty much the same as it was, other than, you know, the expansion of the city and so forth. But it was pretty much the same, really. The approaches to Bluegrass Field, of course, of 2, 2, and 4 are pretty simple. The terrain hasn't changed that much on an approach out there. Of course, the new runway that they put over there now is, I haven't landed on that runway. In fact, I haven't flown, and I don't fly by myself because of my age. I could, but too many doctors have gone up and gone in because of their age, having heart attacks. Anytime I fly now, I have another person that's qualified pilot to go with me. But I still love to fly.
Would you tell us about the old terminal building?
Well, I don't think the one that was here prior to this one was the original terminal building. I'm not sure.
Correct.
I wasn't around when the old first one, so to speak, was here. The one that they tore down for this is what I was mostly associated with. Well, the old terminal building was sitting a little bit further off to our left over here. Just about where we are now is where Bowman Flying Service was. And then they had another flying service that sold mostly airplanes and had charter trips. Chuck Bowman didn't have too many charter trips. He didn't have the airplanes that were capable of going long distances, where they had some Bonanzas and Twin Barons and so forth, that they got most of the charter trips.
The Aviation Museum of Kentucky has historic aircraft. Are any of them still being flown?
None of the airplanes over in the museum are flyable, with the exception of one, and that belongs to Doc. I'm not sure. We had a mechanic in there going over that twin that biplane, that red. If you've seen it over there, supposedly it's if it passes a maintenance check, it's flyable. But no, I don't know of any of the airplanes in there that are flyable. Most of them that fly or have flown flew in. That's one of the. We could have some other airplanes in here, but at the cost of trucking an airplane in here is just absolutely. In fact, we have one airplane that's outside over there now that used to be sitting on a pedestal in Frankfurt, and just to get that airplane here was something like $60,000 plus to truck it over here.
Do they fly World War II vintage aircraft here from time to time?
They probably were flying over here. Now there's I don't know the name of the people that they have a P-51 and some World War II trainers, but they belong to a doctor. I don't know. I've seen them fly a couple of times, but that type of airplane you don't want to fly too much because it's such a valuable piece of history that now that P-51 over there flies quite a bit, but there's only one person that flies that. That type of airplane, you don't want to take some young student up and try to teach him to fly with that. It'll eat your lunch.
Anything else you'd like to add?
The only, I noticed when I drove in, the cars had parked along the side of the road, I guess to watch the aircraft, but the old terminal building, the fence was right here, and here's a walkway, and here's the terminal building. People used to come out and just line that fence, and they could get almost to the point where you could touch one. And now you come in here, you don't even see it. That's unfortunately, I guess, with the security that it has to be that way.
Do you recall any observation decks on the airport property?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they didn't have an observation deck because all the airliners that came in parked right next to the terminal building. I can remember flying an Electra in here from Washington, and gosh, the number of people I saw out there, I didn't pay attention to before. It just, the terminal building was filled. People ran along the fence. It's just unfortunate that security has to be the way it is now, that you don't get to see an airplane up to the point where you can almost touch it. I guess that's one of the reasons the museum is so popular, because you walk in there and you can climb on a couple of them. The helicopters we've got over there, you can get in, flip switches, and kids can yank the controls around. We have a couple of simulators over there that air coop and that kids can get in, and it actually flies. They enjoy that. But some of the kids that walk in there and you can just see their eyes boing, when they see all those big airplanes sitting right in front of them, and they can go up and put their hands on it. It's unfortunate that's the way it has to be now, but it does.
I noticed that you light up when you were talking about the kids.
Well, that's what the museum over here is for. Is the kids can come in, and because this is really the first chance they get to touch something. Some of the I had, speaking of that, I had one young man that he and his dad were coming through, and I'm guessing he was probably 9, 10, and I started talking about this, that, and the other, and oh, you mean, and he was going into it a lot deeper than I did, and his knowledge already was just blows your mind. I know they asked me what I flew when I was in the Marine Corps, and of course we didn't have a AD over there, and his dad pulled out his computer and he says, "Was this it?" And his son starts talking about. The child was just, I don't know what his IQ was, but at that age, but I suspect that young man will probably go to the Air Force Academy or something like that. It amazes me sometimes that the younger children, the questions that they ask, all the way from ground zero up to, some of them are over my head. But it's I just thoroughly enjoy taking kids through and adults too, as far as that goes, and the questions they ask, and they're not stupid questions. Some of them get into it in depth. I had one young man. I think he went to UK. I'm not sure what college he was in, but we were talking about that Tomcat that's over there, and he got into some pretty deep aerodynamics that kind of surprised me what he knew. But that's the type of thing that we want to build on. These the summer programs that we have, they're a week and 2 weeks, but the last day of each one, we take an airplane, a Cessna 172, and we go from here to Frankfurt and Georgetown and back here, and the kids can actually fly the airplane. And they get a big kick out of that one. And not only here, but this summertime, we travel with this thing around to Louisville, Bowling Green, Hazard, and you put on the same program.
Talk more about the Bowman Flying Service facilities.
The old hangar that Chuck Bowman had, and he had what we call a bamboo bomber, but it was one of the early twin-engine airplanes that when World War II was hanging up in the it wasn't flyable, but it was in there, this old hangar. And that hangar, I think, they moved it, and it's on the field today out here someplace. I don't know where it is. But it was one hangar and then an office complex. All his airplanes we used for training and for charter or whatever the case may be were sitting outside. It wasn't a big operation like Dick Malloy it was at Bowman Field. But myself and what we had, I think Wally Hampton, who soloed me was still over here, Chuck's, when after I left. I remember he razzed me so much about getting with the airlines, and well, I guess you won't talk to us anymore. But I don't know exactly when Bowman went out of service. We had two. Chuck was here, and then I forgot what the name of that other. I should have looked that up. Anyway, the other flying service that was here, they did a lot more charters. They had the type of airplanes, twins that you could go to Washington, or you could go on the light airplane too. But you had to kind of pedal compared to what you go in with those twins.